They thought I was just a tired old man who didn't understand money. My son-in-law said it to my daughter right in front of me, like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away at my own kitchen table. He said, "Your father doesn't even know what a mutual fund is." And my daughter laughed. I didn't say anything. I just picked up my coffee mug and walked to the window and looked out at the backyard where I'd built a swing set for her when she was 4 years old. I thought about my wife, Meredith. I thought about what she used to say whenever I got angry about something small. "Save it, Arthur. Save it for when it matters." I saved it. For 61 years of marriage, Meredith was the quiet one. People always assumed that meant she was simple. Modest house in Dayton, Ohio. 1 car. She clipped coupons from the Sunday paper every week until the week she died. She bought her shoes at Payless. She made her own birthday cards with scissors and construction paper. What people didn't know, what I didn't even fully know until the fall after she passed, was that Meredith had been mailing a letter every single month for 32 years. 32 years! I had watched her do it hundreds of times and never once thought to ask why. She would sit at the little secretary desk in the hallway, the one that had belonged to her mother, and she would write something in her careful, slanted handwriting, fold it into an envelope, seal it, and put a stamp on it. First of the month, without fail. I assumed it was some kind of correspondence with an old friend. A cousin down in Georgia, maybe. Or one of the women from her church circle who'd moved away. I never asked. That was my failure, not hers. When Meredith died, February, quiet, in her sleep, the way she would have wanted, I was so deep in grief that the first few months were just a blur of casseroles from neighbors and phone calls I couldn't bring myself to return. Our daughter, Pamela, flew in from Denver the day after. Our son, Kevin, drove up from Columbus. And then Kevin's wife, Diane, arrived 2 days later with their 3 kids and enough luggage for a month. I noticed things shifting before I could name what was shifting. It started with small things. Diane rearranging my kitchen cupboards because she said the layout wasn't functional. Kevin suggesting I sell the house because it was too much space for one person. Pamela walking through the rooms with her phone, taking pictures, saying she was just making a record of everything for insurance purposes. I didn't argue. I was still sleeping 12 hours a day and forgetting to eat lunch. Grief does something to your brain that no one really prepares you for. It's not sadness exactly. It's more like static. Everything just becomes noise. Then one Sunday afternoon, about 6 weeks after the funeral, I came downstairs and found Kevin and Diane sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad covered in writing. They went quiet when I walked in. Diane turned the pad face down. Kevin said, "Dad, we've been thinking about your situation. My situation." I sat down. I asked him what situation he meant. What followed was 45 minutes of the most carefully packaged condescension I have ever sat through. They had done research, they said. They had talked to a financial advisor, a friend of Diane's, someone I'd never met. They were worried about me managing everything alone. They were worried about the house being in just my name now. They were worried about what would happen if I had a fall, or got sick, or if my mind started to go. They wanted to help me get organized, Kevin said. What they wanted, I understood eventually, was to be added to the deed of the house. The house that Meredith and I had bought in 1987 for $84,000 and paid off completely by 2009. The house that was now worth, according to Diane's research on Zillow, that she had apparently been conducting for some time, somewhere in the neighborhood of $340,000. I told them I would think about it. Pamela, to her credit, didn't push the way Kevin and Diane did, but she also didn't tell them to stop. She just got quieter and quieter as the weeks went on, and I noticed she started spending more time in Meredith's sewing room going through boxes. When I asked her what she was looking for, she said she just wanted to find some of Mom's things to take home as keepsakes. I said, of course. I didn't say, "Why are you looking in the closet behind the sewing machine?" which is not where Meredith kept sentimental things. Kevin and Diane stayed for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Diane reorganizing and Kevin talking about real estate markets and both of them treating my home like a project they'd inherited. The day they left, Diane hugged me at the door and said she was so glad they'd been able to have these important conversations. Kevin shook my hand and said to call him if I needed anything. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a long time. On the secretary desk, there was a small stack of Meredith's things I hadn't touched since she died. Her reading glasses. a library book that was 2 months overdue, a little ceramic dish shaped like a bird where she kept paper clips. And underneath the ceramic dish, I found an envelope. It was sealed. My name was on the front in Meredith's handwriting. Below my name, she had written, "Open when you're ready, not before." I had walked past that desk every day for 6 weeks. I had seen that envelope and assumed it was something from before she died. Maybe a birthday card she prepared in advance, or a note about where she kept the insurance documents. I had not been ready to open it. I took it to the kitchen. I made a cup of coffee. I sat down at the table where my son had laid out his plans for reorganizing my life, and I opened my wife's last letter to me. It was 4 pages long, front and back. Small handwriting. Very neat. She started by telling me she loved me. She spent a full page on that alone. Not in a flowery way, but in specifics. She wrote about the morning I'd gotten up at 5 a.m. to drive her to the emergency room when she thought she was having a heart attack and it turned out to be a panic attack, and how I'd held her hand the whole way there without asking a single question. She wrote about the time our basement flooded, and instead of getting angry, I'd made popcorn and we'd watched the water rise together and laughed until we cried. Small things. The kind of things that don't make it into eulogies. Then she said she needed to tell me something she should have told me years ago, and she was sorry she'd waited. For 32 years, Meredith had been sending monthly contributions to a revocable living trust that she had set up in 1992 with the help of an attorney named Mr. Ton Hargrove at a firm in downtown Dayton. The trust held the title to our house. It named me as the sole trustee and sole beneficiary during my lifetime. She had updated it every few years to reflect changes in the law. She had started it, she wrote, the year Kevin married Diane, not because she disliked Diane. She was careful to say that. But because she had seen something in Diane that concerned her, a particular way of looking at things, of calculating what belonged to whom, and she had wanted to make sure that whatever happened to her, I would never be in a position where my home could be taken from me without my full and willing consent. She had also, over those 32 years, been making small monthly deposits to a brokerage account in my name only. Not huge amounts, $50 here, $100 there, sometimes less when times were tight. Reinvested dividends, left completely alone. At the current value, when I finally called Mr. Hargrove's firm the following Monday, the account held $218,000. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the law office for 20 minutes after that phone call. I didn't cry. I just sat there thinking about my wife at her little secretary desk with her careful handwriting and her first-of-the-month envelopes. And I thought about all the years I had watched her clip coupons and assumed that was all there was. She had not been simple. She had been strategic. She had been protecting me for 3 decades before I knew I needed protecting. I called Kevin that evening. I told him I had found some of your mother's documents, and I needed a few weeks to review everything with an attorney before we had any more discussions about the house. There was a pause. He said, "What documents?" I said, "Estate planning documents. Turns out your mother was more organized than either of us realized." Another pause. "Dad, you should let me or Pamela be there when you meet with any attorney. We just want to make sure no one takes advantage of you." I almost laughed. I held it together. I told him I would keep him posted. I spent the next 3 weeks meeting with Mr. Hargrove's colleague, a woman named Mrs. Hargrove's colleague, Okafor, who was patient and thorough and who explained everything to me twice when I needed it. The trust was ironclad. The brokerage account was mine outright. The house was mine and had always been mine and could not be touched without my signature. Mrs. Okafor also helped me draft a new will, one that reflected what I actually wanted, now that I finally understood what I had. I left Kevin's share unchanged. He was still my son, whatever else was true. But I added a clause that was very specific about the house. It would not be sold during my lifetime without my written, witnessed, notarized consent. And upon my death, it would not pass to Kevin or Pamela directly. It would be held in trust for my 4 grandchildren, Kevin's 3 and Pamela's 1, to be used for their college education. The house itself would be sold at that time, and the proceeds divided equally among them. Kevin and Diane would not be able to touch a penny of it. I told Kevin and Pamela what I had decided during a phone call in October, about 8 months after Meredith died. Kevin said nothing for a long time. Then he said he thought that was pretty unfair to him and Pamela as the actual children. I said I understood he felt that way. Diane got on the phone. She must have been listening the whole time, and she said they had spent weeks helping me, that they had given up their time, that this was not how families were supposed to work. I let her finish. Then I said, Diane, you turned my wife's spice rack face forward because you said she'd been storing it wrong. She had been storing it that way for 30 years. It was not wrong. It was hers. I hung up. Pamela called me separately the next day. She cried a little. She said she was sorry she hadn't spoken up more when Kevin and Diane were pushing me, that she'd known it didn't feel right, but she hadn't known how to say so. I believed her. We talked for an hour. I told her the grandchildren's trust applied to her daughter too, that her daughter would have full equal access to the education fund. Pamela said, Daddy, that's more than fair. Kevin didn't call for 2 months. When he finally did, he didn't mention the trust or the will. He asked how I was doing. He asked about the weather in Dayton. He asked if the gutters had been cleaned before winter. I told him the gutters were fine. I had cleaned them myself. He sounded surprised. I didn't tell him I'd also started a small garden in the backyard, in the bed where Meredith used to grow tomatoes. I didn't tell him about the twice-weekly water aerobics class I joined at the Y, or the Thursday morning men's group at church where I'd started showing up again for the first time in years. I didn't tell him that I'd taken $5,000 from the brokerage account, with Mrs. Okafor's help, all properly documented, and paid off the remaining balance on my car, which I had been nursing along for longer than I should have. I didn't tell him that I'd taken another $10,000 and sent checks to each of my 4 grandchildren's college savings accounts, with notes that said simply, from Grandma's savings, she wanted you to have this. I kept those things for myself. There's a picture on the secretary desk now. I didn't move the desk, I never will, of Meredith at our kitchen table sometime in the early 90s. She's got the Sunday paper spread out in front of her, and she's holding her scissors, and she's laughing at something off camera. I don't remember what she was laughing at. I wish I did. But I know what she was doing. Every first of the month at that desk. She was making sure I would be okay. She was doing it before I knew I needed it. She was doing it before I deserved it, probably. She was doing it quietly, without ever making me feel like I needed taking care of, which, if you knew me at all, you would understand, was the only way I would have let her do it. The coupons were real. The careful living was real. But underneath all of it, she was building something, not for herself. For me. They thought she was simple. They thought I was weak. Meredith had the last word. She just waited 32 years to say it.